Welcome to this episode of Washington in Focus. I'm your host, TJ Martinell. With me is our reporter, Tim Klauser. And we're going to discuss a story of his about the Spokane City Council proposing an ordinance that would require every rental unit to have adequate cooling in by 2031. Tim, what does adequate cooling mean and why do they feel like it's necessary to regulate rental units like this?
Yeah, so the proposal introduced by Councilmember Paul Dillon earlier this week essentially defines adequate cooling as temperatures at 80 degrees or below. So this ordinance is essentially saying if you're a landlord and you have a rental, you need to make sure that each bedroom in that rental is at 80 degrees or lower. If it's above that, the ordinance provides remedies to the tenant to take action through various means. But I mean, this is a little bit bigger than saying, oh, well, you need to make sure that the apartment is cool. What this ordinance does is it creates this new condition of habitability. So essentially, if you have a rental unit and you're not keeping it below 80 degrees in those rooms, which is what it defines as adequate cooling, um, the renter can take actions and you could potentially lose your ability to rent out this space. So creates some additional costs for the landlord. Now, you think when you rent out a place, you're renting out your property, you have to do the upkeep, the maintenance. If a fridge goes out, you need to replace it for your renter. But this is taking things a step further and saying that landlords have a responsibility to provide these AC units. And there's conditions in this proposal that say if a unit doesn't have adequate cooling, with minor notice, a renter could go out and buy an AC unit and then deduct it from their rent. Doesn't sound like a crazy idea, but it is additional costs that landlords have to face. But there's also provisions written into this proposal where it could allow you to potentially buy multiple AC units for each bedroom in a unit and then deduct all of those from the cost of your rent. So that could add up to a landlord. And for those landlords with units that aren't making a big margin, they're not bringing in much money compared to what it's on the market for, it might not be worth it for them to continue renting out these spaces if they have to buy and maintain these AC units as well.
I think this is a really interesting quote by Councilmember Cathcart, where he said, "We had 100 years plus of development, and this has not been a requirement for all that time. Landlords have invested, they've done all kinds of things, and to now suddenly throw this in here and say, oh, and by the way, I think." I think it's an interesting point. What Spokane is not exactly known for its hot weather. I've spent time in Spokane, and it can get hot like it can in even in Seattle, but it what's motivating them to do this regulation where they feel the need to basically go into a landlord's rental unit and say you have to have this installed or the tenant can install it. And of course, that doesn't motivate the tenant to buy an affordable, cheap AC unit, right? You can just deduct it off of your monthly rent. Well, great. You're going to go buy the most expensive AC unit you can possibly find, and then just write off your whole
Mhm.
month's rent or something like that. I mean, you think that they would have put a cap and say, it the AC unit cannot be more than this percentage of your monthly rent, because it
Mhm.
just incentivizes people to buy costly AC units that are probably going to suck more power than a smaller one. So I aren't we trying to like consume less energy, or isn't that partly what they're trying to do? It just seems really I mean, have they been given any specific reasons why they want to introduce this regulation?
Yeah, so Spokane does get relatively hot in the summer. I mean, it's no Arizona or Nevada or a desert condition like that, but it does get hot and dry. I believe the summer of 2025 was actually one of the driest summers on record for Spokane. So there are some concerns there. Back in 2021, much of Washington experienced what was called this Northwest heat dome, where the region got really hot in Spokane County in particular, there was at least 19 people that died due to heat related illness during that heat dome, and hundreds of people seeked medical care. So, Councilmember Dillon is essentially saying, look, we need this new condition of habitability in order to overcome these concerns to keep residents safe. But I think it does beg the question. I mean, who is responsible for costs like this? Because you rent out a unit, um, you're paying rent, but there's lots of things that you're responsible for generally. The electrical bill, different utility bills. If you want Wi-Fi, you have to provide Wi-Fi. If you want a mini fridge, you got to get a mini fridge. There's nothing saying that, but who's responsible for buying a fan or a portable heater or an AC? Should that be the landlord or should that be the renter? I mean, I'm a renter myself. I've bought my own personal fans, portable heaters, and stuff like that, and that comes out of my own pocket. It begs the question, and the ordinance does leave it pretty open. I mean, you could just go out and get a small fan and put it in there, and that's not going to be that expensive, and you can hand that cost over to your landlord potentially. But it also leaves the door open, like you're saying, to buy these more costly units, and at that potentially multiple AC units and put them in each room of the unit, and then that cost then falls on the landlord. There's just a lot that goes into this. I mean, there you spoke to Cathcart's quote in the story. This is overcomes about 100 years of precedence in the city. There's a lot of old rental units around the city, and Council President Betsy Wilkerson, she even mentioned that her home, it's an older home. Oftentimes, the temperature will vary from one bedroom to another. So, how are they going to track and enforce that? What if one room is 75 degrees and the hallway is 81 degrees? What does that
I
mean?
think
How are they going to track it?
what you're going to see, just this is a possibility, but what you'll see is somebody, and this is a question the council should really ask themselves. There's people who legitimately are in rental units that it's really, really hot and they should get, there are affordable ways of cooling a room. There's portable AC units that also can provide heat. But the question is, and this is a question that lawmakers and the local government should and state government should always ask is, how is there a way that this ordinance could be abused? Is there a way somebody could basically, you know, let's say they don't want to pay their last month's rent, right? They just buy an expensive AC unit, write it off, and then they don't have to pay their last month's rent. They just like something like that where you just I'm we can speculate, but there are people who are constantly looking at city ordinances and rental laws and saying, how can I use this to avoid paying rent? I've personally heard of many horror stories of people that basically have managed to get into rental units and don't pay rent and can't be evicted. And so this just adds one more thing that a person can use to justify not paying rent.
Yeah, to play both sides of the coin there. I mean, you could make that argument, but at the same time, you could say, well, if I don't want to pay my $800 rent in whole and I go out and buy a $500 AC, that means I only have to pay $300 in rent. Ultimately, that's still $800. You're just deducting that from your costs. But it does require the landlord to go out and pay something in addition, and then they're taking that off of what they're getting in return through the
Who
rent.
who owns the AC unit? The right? Like,
I would need to dig more into the proposal, but I believe it would be the landlord's AC. So even if you bought the AC and then just like say if you're renting a place and the fridge goes out and you tell your landlord, they're gonna say, hey, likely they'll say, hey, you can go out and buy a fridge and we'll deduct it from the rent. Or you can go out and buy your own fridge and you can take it with you when you leave, or we can just go buy the fridge themselves. And I assume it'll be
well,
somewhat
AC
similar
units
in
are
this case should the proposal pass.
well, AC units are easier to move than refrigerators, so that you just pull it out of the window, and then you just take it with you. And I, I don't. I mean, it's a. I, I mean, this is all. It's all speculative, but it's things that you want to think about before you pass an ordinance like this, where you're regulating the temperatures of a rental unit. in this very kind of it's not like the city's going through every rental unit and checking the temperatures. This is where the tenant gets to decide what the temperature is. So, what yeah, so it just what makes you wonder what is making them do this, or it was you mentioned that people died a couple years ago. Well, I, are they using that as the basis? And if so, how did these people die? Did they die because of just heat exhaustion or heat stroke, or did they have second underlying condition?
Mhm.
I mean, this is the thing where something happens and it's not you just wonder how big of a problem this really is, and if it's something that the city needs to get involved in.
Yeah, I think the big thing here is that what it means for people that have been renting out their properties for decades. This is a new cost for them. And on top of that, the ordinance has a provision that says any new units permitted and built after 2027 have to have adequate cooling built in. So they need to plan ahead for this. So that means developers are also having to include these costs in their project moving forward. And Council President Betsy Wilkerson brought this up in her comments earlier this week and said, look, there's development going on all around Spokane County, but the city of Spokane is a donut. And she attributed that to much of the regulations that they've put in place and this red tape that they've added. Uh, she's worried about further pushing development out of Spokane, especially when a lot of people on the council are saying, "Hey, this is a time where we really need to build more housing."
Well, we'll definitely want to keep an eye on this story. This is because you wonder when the regulations finally stop, and or if it's just there's going to be more, what it does to the rental supply in Spokane, and if this is a policy that they'll try to impose statewide, if they haven't already. So thanks, Tim, for the coverage. Listeners can keep up with this story and others at thecentersquare.com. I'm your host, TJ Martinell. Thank you for listening to this episode of Washington in Focus.